that I had dropped out of medical school. It was a lie, but that single lie cost me my entire family. They cut off contact, they blocked my phone number, they missed my residency graduation, they didn't come to my wedding. For 5 years, I lived as if I had no parents at all. Then last month, my sister was rushed into the emergency room. She was unconscious, bleeding badly, close to death. The trauma team immediately paged the chief surgeon. When the doors opened and the surgeon stepped toward her stretcher, my mother saw the name on the white coat. She grabbed my father's arm so hard it left marks. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there in the... I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel. Your support really motivates me to keep sharing stories like this. Now let me take you back to a fall evening about 5 years ago, to a kitchen table in Hartford, Connecticut, and the last time my father ever looked at me with something that resembled pride. Growing up, there were 2 daughters in the Reed household, but only one who truly mattered. My sister Vanessa Reed is 3 years older than I am. She was born performing. School plays, student council, social events, Vanessa could charm every adult in any room and leave them laughing. My parents, Andrew and Linda Reed, middle class and practical, adored her for it. My father managed a manufacturing plant, and my mother worked part-time as a bookkeeper. To them, 2 qualities mattered more than anything else: appearances and obedience. Vanessa delivered both perfectly. I was the opposite, quiet. The girl who spent Thanksgiving with a biology textbook while Vanessa entertained everyone at the table. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't difficult. I was simply invisible. There's a difference between being forgotten and never truly being seen. Here's a small example. In 8th grade, I qualified for the state science fair, the only student from my school to make it that far. That same weekend, Vanessa had a performance with her community theater group. You can probably guess where my parents went. When I returned home with a second-place ribbon, my father barely glanced at it. "That's nice, Helena," he said. He never asked what my project was about, not once. I convinced myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need their attention. Instead, I poured everything into my studies, my grades, my AP classes, my college applications. If I couldn't be the daughter they noticed, I decided I would become the daughter they couldn't ignore. And for a brief moment, it actually worked. The day I was accepted into the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine, nearly 3,000 miles away from home in Hartford, something changed. For the first time in my life, my father looked at me, really looked, and said 5 words I had waited 18 years to hear. But I'll come back to that in a moment, because you first need to understand what Vanessa did when she realized the spotlight was beginning to shift. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in April. I remember because Vanessa happened to be visiting that weekend. She was 22 at the time, working as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized firm in Stamford. Her life was stable, comfortable, respectable. Fine described it perfectly, even if she would never say that out loud. My father read the letter at the kitchen table. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "University of California, San Francisco," he said slowly, almost tasting the words. "That's a real medical school." Then he looked at me and added, "Maybe you'll actually make something of yourself after all, Helena." It wasn't exactly praise, but it was the closest thing to it I had ever received from him, and I held on to those words like oxygen. That night, my mother called Evelyn Parker, my aunt. She called her sister. She even called 2 neighbors. "Helena got into medical school. Can you believe it?" Her voice carried a tone I had never heard directed at me before. Pride. Real, unmistakable pride. At dinner, I glanced across the table at Vanessa. She was smiling, but the smile stopped at her lips. Her eyes were doing something else entirely, calculating, measuring, recalibrating. I recognize that expression now. Back then, I just assumed she was tired from the drive. That same week, Vanessa began calling me more often, 2 or 3 times every week. "How's packing going? Who's your roommate? What's San Francisco like?" She asked about my class schedule, my professors, the people I was meeting. She remembered every name I mentioned. I thought my sister was finally paying attention to me. I thought my acceptance into medical school had somehow opened the door to a real relationship between us. Something like respect, maybe even connection. What I didn't realize was that I was handing her ammunition. Every detail, every vulnerability, every piece of my life. I gave it to her freely, grateful that she seemed interested. Everything began to unravel during my clinical years in medical school. My roommate and closest friend was a woman named Claire Dawson. She had grown up in the foster care system and didn't have any real family to rely on. Claire was the only reason I survived my first year. Once, during a brutal anatomy exam week, I called home hoping for a little encouragement. My mother answered and immediately said, "I can't talk right now, Helena. Vanessa is having a stressful day at work." After I hung up, Claire sat on the apartment floor beside me and said, "Their loss. Now get up. We still have cadavers to memorize." In August of my third year, Claire was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She had no family, no support network, just me. The very next morning, I went to the dean's office and explained everything. He approved a formal leave of absence for 1 semester so I could take care of her. The paperwork was filed, my place in the program was secured, and I planned to return in January. Everything was documented. Everything was legitimate. I moved into the spare room at Claire Dawson's apartment. I drove her to chemotherapy appointments, sat beside her hospital bed, and held her hand in the oncology ward at 3 in the morning when the pain became so intense she could barely breathe. I called my sister Vanessa Reed to explain what was happening. I'm not even sure why I did it. Maybe some part of me still believed she was the sister she had always pretended to be. I told her about Claire's diagnosis, about the leave of absence I had taken from school, and about my plan to return to classes in the spring. Vanessa's voice was soft and sweet. "Oh my God, Helena, I'm so sorry. Take as much time as you need. I won't tell Mom and Dad anything. It would only make them worry." 3 days later, she called them. I still don't know exactly what she said that night. I wouldn't discover the full extent of her lie until 5 years later, when everything finally unraveled in the last place anyone expected. But the damage happened immediately. The phone rang at 11 that night. I was sitting in a plastic chair beside Claire's hospital bed. She had reacted badly to the latest round of chemo and had been admitted overnight. My screen lit up with my father's number. "Your sister told us everything," my father said. His voice was cold, completely flat. "About you dropping out, about the boyfriend, all of it." "Dad, that's not—" "Vanessa showed us the messages," he interrupted. "She showed us proof." I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. "What messages? What proof?" "Dad, I'm literally sitting in a hospital right now. I'm taking care of my friend." "Vanessa said you'd say exactly that." He paused for a moment. "She told us you'd have some kind of story ready." Then my mother took the phone. Her voice was shaking. "How could you lie to us for an entire year, Helena?" "Mom, please just listen. I filed an official leave of absence. I can show you the paperwork. I can give you the dean's phone number." "Enough," my father said again. "Don't call this house until you're ready to tell the truth. You've embarrassed this family enough." The line went dead. I sat on the hospital floor for 20 minutes. Claire's IV machine beeped quietly behind the curtain. My phone still showed the call duration on the screen, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. That was all it took for my parents to erase me. 20 minutes later, a text came from Vanessa. "I'm sorry, Helena. I had to tell them. I couldn't keep your secret anymore." She wasn't sorry. That message was simply the final signature on the most precise attack she had ever made, complete with a broken heart emoji at the end. I was 3,000 miles away on the West Coast, with $46 in my bank account and a dying friend in the next room. And in that moment, I officially became no one's daughter. But I tried. I need you to understand that. I tried everything I could from 3,000 miles away. Over the next 5 days, I called my parents 14 times. The first 3 calls went straight to voicemail. By the 4th attempt, my father had blocked my number. 2 days later, my mother blocked me too. I sent 2 emails, one short and one long. In the longer one, I attached the official leave of absence paperwork as a PDF. I included the dean's direct phone number. I even listed Claire's oncologist so they could verify everything themselves. Neither email received a response. I wrote a handwritten letter and mailed it priority from Portland, where Claire and I were staying during her treatment. 5 days later, it came back to me unopened. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope. Next, I called Evelyn Parker, my father's younger sister, and the only person in the family who had ever treated me like I mattered. She phoned my father that same evening. I know because she called me back 40 minutes later, her voice heavy. "He told me to stay out of it, sweetheart," she said quietly. "He said you've made your bed." Evelyn tried to explain about the leave of absence. My father hung up on her. 5 days, 14 phone calls, 2 emails, 1 letter, 1 relative trying to intervene, every attempt rejected, blocked, or returned. And that's when I realized something painful. This wasn't new. This was simply the pattern of my entire life, compressed into its most brutal form. Every science fair they skipped, every recital they forgot. Every time Vanessa's version of events was believed instantly, while mine was dismissed without question. This was just the final, loudest version of the same story. On the 6th day, I stopped calling. Not because I had given up, but because I finally understood something. They had already chosen a long time ago. Vanessa had simply given them permission to stop pretending otherwise. Claire died on a quiet Sunday morning in December. The monitor let out a steady tone as the pale winter light filtered through the hospice window. I was the only person in the room. No one from my family called. No one knew. The only person who had known the truth, Vanessa, was far too busy protecting the lies she had created to notice that the reason for my leave of absence had just stopped breathing. I arranged a small funeral myself. 6 people attended. Claire's former foster sister drove up from Eugene. 2 classmates came. A nurse from the oncology ward who had grown close to her stood quietly in the back. I delivered the eulogy in a chapel that could hold 60 people, speaking to rows of empty seats. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't broken, but because I had been crying for 3 straight months, and there was simply nothing left. That night, I sat alone in Claire's apartment, our apartment. Her coffee mug still rested on the kitchen counter. Her jacket still hung by the door. I opened my laptop and stared at the application form to re-enroll for the spring semester at UCSF School of Medicine. Then I found something tucked inside Claire's copy of Gray's Anatomy, a book we always joked about. She had marked the chapter on the pancreas with a yellow sticky note. Her handwriting was shaky but deliberate. "Finish what you started, Helena. Become the doctor I know you are. And don't let anyone, especially your own blood, tell you who you are." She had written it weeks before she died. Somehow she knew she wouldn't be there when I needed that push. I closed the laptop, then I opened it again and filled out the re-enrollment form. There were only 2 options in front of me: collapse or climb. I chose to climb. Not for my parents, not for revenge. I did it for Claire, and for the version of myself she believed in. I returned to school in January with no family support and no safety net. I took on additional student loans, worked part-time as a research assistant, and ate hospital cafeteria leftovers more times than I care to admit. Medical school doesn't pause for personal tragedy. Anatomy exams don't wait because your family disowned you. 12-hour clinical rotations don't get shorter just because you cried in a supply closet at 2 in the morning. So eventually, I stopped crying and started working. I worked like my life depended on it. In a way, it did. I finished medical school on time. No one from Hartford came to the graduation. I matched into a surgical residency at St. Matthew Medical Center on the East Coast, a Level 1 trauma center, and one of the busiest hospitals in Connecticut. That was where I met Dr. Margaret Collins. Everyone called her Maggie. She was 58, the hospital's former chief of surgery, tough as steel wrapped in a lab coat. She became the mentor I desperately needed, and in many ways the closest thing to a mother figure I had left. During my 3rd year of residency, I met Daniel Brooks. He was a civil rights attorney who volunteered at a small community clinic near the hospital. calm eyes, quiet confidence, dry humor. He was the first person I told the entire story to who didn't flinch, didn't pity me, and didn't try to solve it for me. He simply listened. When I finished, he said 4 words. "You deserve better." That was enough. We got married on a quiet Saturday afternoon in Maggie's backyard. About 30 people attended. Daniel's father walked me down the aisle. I had mailed an invitation to Hartford, of course. It came back exactly the same way my earlier letter had, unopened. Evelyn Parker was there, though. She cried enough for 2 parents. After the ceremony, Maggie handed me a sealed envelope. "A nomination," she said. "Don't open it yet. You're not ready." I slipped it into my desk drawer and didn't ask any questions. 5 years passed. In that time, I became someone my family probably wouldn't recognize anymore. Let me pause here for a moment. If you've ever had a situation where your family refused to hear your side of the story, where the truth didn't matter because someone else's lie, and if you think my parents are eventually going to regret what they did, type karma, because what happened next was something even I never saw coming. Fast forward to the present. It's January. I'm 36 years old, and I've been the chief of trauma surgery at St. Matthew Medical Center for the past 2 years. I own a small house in the suburbs with a porch that catches the morning sun. I have a husband who still makes me laugh every single day. And we have a golden retriever named Watson, who has never judged me once for eating cereal at midnight. It's a good life, a real one, built piece by piece with my own hands. But there's a certain ache that never fully disappears. It sits somewhere deep in your chest, in the space where family is supposed to live. I don't wake up crying anymore. I don't stare at my phone hoping for a Hartford area code. But every Thanksgiving there's always a moment when I set the table, count the plates, and feel the absence like a phantom limb. Evelyn Parker still calls every Sunday. She's my only thread back to that world. I never ask about my parents, but when she volunteers information, I listen. Mom and Dad are healthy. Vanessa got divorced 2 years ago. She's working in medical device sales now. The irony of that isn't lost on me. Last week, Evelyn called sounding different. Careful, hesitant. "Helena," she said, "there's something I need to tell you about Vanessa. Something concerning." Before she could explain, my hospital pager went off. Trauma activation. I told her I'd call her back. I never got the chance. Because whatever Evelyn was about to warn me about was already racing down Interstate 91, a sedan speeding toward a red light. Within the hour, the person she was talking about would be lying on my operating table, bleeding out, with my parents sitting in the waiting room and my name printed on the chart. I just didn't know it yet. But to understand how we got there, I need to step back for a moment. What Vanessa Reed did wasn't just one lie. It was a campaign. Over the years, Evelyn had been feeding me pieces of the truth, carefully and reluctantly, as if she were disarming a bomb one wire at a time, and the picture she described was worse than I had imagined. For 5 years, Vanessa maintained the story she had created. At every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every family gathering, she played the role of the grieving older sister. "We don't really talk about Helena," she would tell our cousins. "It's too painful for Mom and Dad." She would lower her voice, shake her head sadly, and let the silence do the rest. But she didn't stop there. She added details. She told our grandmother that I was homeless. She told Uncle Pete's wife that she had heard from friends that I was in and out of rehab. 2 Christmases ago, she told my mother she had tried to reach out to me, but I refused to answer, that I had cut them off. She turned the entire story upside down. At Thanksgiving last year, Evelyn told me once, her voice tight with anger, Vanessa said, "I've begged Helena to come home. She won't even return my calls. I think she hates us." At that exact moment, I was 3 floors deep in an operating room trying to save a teenager's life. The twisted brilliance of Vanessa's plan, and I say that with complete disgust, was that she didn't need my parents to forget me. She only needed them to believe that I had abandoned them. That way their grief became proof. Their silence became justified. And Vanessa remained exactly what she had always been. The loyal daughter. The one who stayed. She wasn't protecting our parents. She was protecting her position. And there was something else Evelyn eventually told me. Something darker that I didn't learn until much later. One morning about 6 months ago, Daniel Brooks brought it up over coffee. He had apparently been sitting on the information for 2 years. "There's something I never told you," he said, placing his mug down carefully in that quiet lawyer voice he uses when he's about to deliver bad news. 2 years ago, someone contacted HR at your old hospital using a fake name. Later, someone in the hospital's IT department quietly checked the inquiry log. They were asking about you, your employment status, whether you'd ever been disciplined, whether your credentials were legitimate. I stared at him. "Who?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "I had a colleague track the inquiry," he said. "The IP address came from Hartford." The kitchen fell silent. The only sounds were the coffee maker hissing and Watson's tail tapping lightly against the floor. "So, she was looking for something," I said slowly. "Anything," Daniel replied. "Anything that could keep the story alive. Something she could point to as proof that you were a fraud." "She didn't find anything." "No," he said quietly, "because there was nothing to find." I tightened my grip around the mug in my hands, feeling the heat press through the ceramic. "She didn't just lie about me once, Daniel. She's been hunting for 5 years. He leaned across the table and placed his hand gently over mine. "That isn't normal sibling rivalry, Helena. That's something else entirely." He was right. Vanessa Reed hadn't simply told a lie and moved on with her life. She had constructed an entire structure of deception, layer by layer, like an engineer building something meant to last. Every holiday conversation, every whispered rumor, every anonymous inquiry was another brick reinforcing the story. At any point, I could have fought back. I could have hired a lawyer, confronted my parents, dragged the truth into the open. But I didn't. Because life was about to expose everything for me in the most brutal, public, and ironic way imaginable. And it began with a pager going off at 3 in the morning, Thursday night, January, 3:07 a.m. The sound of the pager pulled me out of a deep sleep. Daniel shifted beside me in bed and murmured something half awake. Watson lifted his head from the foot of the bed. The glowing screen cut through the dark room. Level 1 trauma. MVC. Female 35. Severe blunt abdominal trauma. Hemodynamically unstable. ETA. 8 minutes. I was dressed in 4 minutes and in the car 2 minutes after that. The roads were empty, slick with rain, the kind of deep winter darkness Connecticut gets in January. As I drove, I ran through the scenario the way I always do. Mechanism of injury, possible internal damage, surgical approach, motor vehicle collision, severe abdominal trauma, unstable vitals, likely splenic rupture, possible liver laceration. I had performed this surgery dozens of times. When I arrived at St. Matthew Medical Center, I badged through the ambulance entrance and headed straight for the trauma bay. My team was already assembling, 2 residents, a trauma nurse, anesthesia on standby. I grabbed the intake iPad from the charge station and opened the incoming patient chart. Patient, Vanessa Reed. DOB, March 14, 1987. Emergency contact, Andrew Reed, father. I stopped walking. For a moment, the entire hallway seemed to recede. The beeping monitors, the overhead announcements, the squeak of shoes across linoleum. For 2 seconds, maybe 3, I wasn't a surgeon standing in a hospital corridor. I was 26 again, sitting on the floor of a hospital in Portland, with a phone pressed to my ear, listening to silence on the other end of the line. "Dr. Reed?" My charge nurse, Angela Ramirez, appeared beside me. "Are you okay?" I blinked, set the iPad down, and steadied my voice. "I'm fine. Prep Trauma Bay 2. Page Dr. Raj Patel. I want him on standby." In the distance, I heard the rising scream of an ambulance siren, and somewhere behind that siren were 2 people I hadn't seen in 5 years. The ambulance doors burst open moments later, and the stretcher rolled in fast. Vanessa lay strapped down, unconscious. The oxygen mask fogged faintly with shallow breaths. Blood stained the front of her shirt, and one arm hung loosely off the side of the rail. The paramedics spoke quickly as they moved. BP dropping, heart rate climbing, 2 large-bore IVs running. Then, seconds later, 2 figures rushed in behind them. My parents. My mother looked 10 years older than I remembered. Her hair was thinner, her face drawn. She was wearing a bathrobe and mismatched slippers. My father had thrown on flannel and jeans in obvious panic. His face was pale, almost gray. "That's my daughter," he shouted past the triage nurse. "Where are they taking her? I need to talk to the doctor in charge." Angela stepped forward immediately, hands raised calmly. "Sir, family needs to wait in the surgical waiting area. The trauma team is already working. The chief surgeon is handling the case." "The chief?" My father grabbed her arm. "Then get the chief here right now." Angela glanced through the glass partition toward the trauma bay. Her eyes landed on me, already in scrubs, gloves on, badge hanging from my chest. She read the name. For a fraction of a second, her eyes widened. I gave a slight shake of my head. "Not now." She turned back to my father, composed again. "Sir, the chief is preparing for surgery. Someone will update you as soon as possible. Please follow me to the waiting area." They were led down the hallway. My mother whispered frantic prayers, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. My father kept looking back through every window they passed. "She's all we have," he said to no one in particular. "Please, she's all we have." I heard every word through the glass. "She's all we have," as if I had never existed. I stepped into the scrub room alone and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds. I turned on the faucet and let the hot water run over my hands while I stared into the stainless steel mirror above the sink. The reflection looked distorted, stretched, almost unreal. Scrub cap on, badge visible. The face staring back at me belonged to a woman who had been cut out of her own family's life, like a diseased organ. And now that same woman was being asked to save the person who had held the knife. Part of me wanted to walk away, call Patel, let someone else handle it. Let my parents owe their daughter's life to a stranger instead of me. It would have been simpler, cleaner. But a woman was lying on that table with a ruptured spleen and what looked like a grade 3 liver laceration. She was bleeding faster than we could replace it. She had maybe 30 minutes left if surgery didn't begin immediately. And the best surgeon in that building was me. I paged Dr. Raj Patel. "I have a conflict of interest," I said. "The patient is a family member. I'm documenting it now. If my judgment becomes compromised at any point, you take over. No questions." Patel's voice came back steady. "Understood, Chief." I asked Angela to record the disclosure in the nursing log. Everything documented, everything done by the book. Then I pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, pushed through the operating room doors, and stepped up to the table. My sister lay there, bruised and pale, the oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. There were faint worry lines around her eyes that hadn't existed 5 years ago. For 3 seconds, she wasn't the woman who had destroyed my life. She was simply a patient on my table, and that was exactly how I needed to see her. "All right," I said quietly. "Scalpel." The surgery lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. The steering column and the red light had torn her body apart. We removed the ruptured spleen. We repaired the grade 3 liver laceration with careful, precise sutures. 2 separate mesenteric vessels were bleeding internally. We clamped them, cauterized them, and stabilized the damage. I spoke only when it was necessary. Suction, clamp, lap pad, retract. My hands moved exactly as they had been trained to move, steady and controlled, fast when urgency demanded it, slower when precision mattered more. The residents watched closely. They always do during my cases. I could feel their attention sharpen when the liver repair became complicated. I didn't hesitate. I couldn't afford to. At 6:48 a.m., I placed the final stitch. Vanessa Reed's vital signs stabilized, her blood pressure normalized. The output was clear. She was alive. Across the room, Dr. Raj Patel, who had been standing quietly the entire time, lowered his mask. "Helena," he said softly. That was flawless. Do you want me to speak to the family? I removed my gloves, dropped them into the bin, and washed my hands. Automatic movements, the same routine I had performed thousands of times. No, I said. I'll handle it. For a moment I caught my reflection again in the stainless steel mirror of the scrub room. Same face, same badge. But something had shifted. For 5 years I had been the daughter who vanished. Now I was the surgeon who had just pulled her sister back from the edge of death. Those two realities were about to collide in a waiting room less than 40 feet away, with my entire night shift team watching. I straightened my scrub top, checked my badge, took one steady breath, and walked toward the waiting area. The hallway had never felt longer. Hospitals have a strange quiet at 7 in the morning. Fluorescent lights hum softly, televisions murmur to empty chairs, and exhausted families sit frozen between hope and fear. Two families sat in opposite corners. In the center row were my parents, rigid, sleepless, terrified. I pushed through the double doors wearing my surgical scrubs, mask resting around my neck, hair pulled back. My badge hung clearly on my chest where anyone could read it. Dr. Helena Reed, MD, FACS, Chief of Trauma Surgery. My father stood first. He always did. It was instinct, his need to control the room. Doctor, how is she? Is Vanessa? He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes dropped to my badge, then lifted slowly to my face, then back to the badge again. I watched recognition move through him like a physical tremor, starting in his hands and climbing into his jaw. My mother looked up half a second later. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hand clamped onto my father's arm so tightly that later he would have bruises shaped exactly like her fingers. 5 seconds of silence. 5 seconds that carried the weight of 5 years. I spoke first, calm and clinical, the same tone I use with every family in this room. Mr. and Mrs. Reed, I'm Dr. Reed, Chief of Trauma Surgery. Your daughter Vanessa sustained a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 liver laceration in the accident. The surgery was successful. She is stable and currently in the ICU. You'll be able to see her in about an hour. Mr. and Mrs. Reed, not Mom and Dad. I watched the words land. I watched them cut. Behind me, through the glass partition, Angela Ramirez and 2 nurses were standing still. They had already pieced it together. My mother moved first. She stepped forward, arms lifting instinctively as a sob broke from her chest. Helena, oh my God, Helena. I stepped back, just half a step, polite, clear. She froze. Her hands hovered awkwardly in the air before slowly falling back to her sides. My father's voice came out rough, like gravel grinding together. You're a doctor. I am. You're the chief. I am. But Vanessa said, what exactly did she say? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could see his mind scrambling, trying to rebuild 5 years of certainty that were collapsing in real time. My mother was crying openly now. We thought you dropped out, she said through tears. She told you I dropped out. She told you I had a boyfriend with a drug problem. She told you I was homeless. She told you I refused to contact you. My voice stayed level. None of it was true, not one word. Through the glass behind me, I saw Angela cover her mouth. Dr. Kenji Kimura looked away, jaw tight. Another nurse had stopped writing entirely. My father tried to regain control. This isn't the time or place, Helena. Your sister is in the ICU. I know, I replied calmly. I just spent 3 hours and 40 minutes making sure she survives. So yes, Dad, I'm aware. He had nothing to say. For the first time in my life, my father, who always had a decision, an order, a judgment ready, stood completely speechless. Silence did what I never could. 5 years of unanswered calls, returned letters, and ignored emails hadn't changed anything. But standing here, alive, accomplished, wearing proof across my chest, that spoke louder than any explanation I had ever sent. My mother reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. The letters, she whispered. You said you sent letters. 2 emails with my leave of absence paperwork attached. 1 handwritten letter mailed priority. You returned it unopened. I recognized your handwriting. She pressed a trembling fist against her mouth. My father stared down at the floor. I called 14 times in 5 days, I continued quietly. I asked Evelyn Parker to talk to you. You told her to stay out of it. I wasn't accusing them. I was simply stating facts. Facts don't need volume. At that moment, Angela stepped into the doorway. She didn't know the entire story yet. She only had hospital business. Dr. Reed, I'm sorry to interrupt, she said. The board chair reviewed the overnight trauma report. He asked me to pass along that the Physician Excellence Award Committee sends their congratulations for tonight's surgical outcome. She said it casually, the way you'd mention any routine message. She had no idea she had just dropped a second bomb. My mother stared at me through swollen eyes. Physician? Of the year? It's just an internal recognition, I said. Nothing important. I turned to Angela. Thank you. I need to check post-operative vitals. Then I walked toward the ICU corridor, steps measured, back straight. I didn't look back, but behind me I heard my mother's voice, small, broken. Andrew, what have we done? And I heard something I had never heard from my father before. Nothing. For the first time in his life, silence was the only honest thing he had left. 4 hours later, I entered ICU room 6. The monitor beeped steadily while pale morning light filtered through the blinds. I began the standard post-operative check, vital signs, drainage output, wound inspection, routine work. Except nothing about this situation was routine. Vanessa's eyes were open. They were glassy from anesthesia, unfocused at first. She blinked slowly at the ceiling, then at the IV stand. Eventually her gaze drifted toward me. She squinted. Her eyes moved to my badge, then back to my face, then to the badge again. The color drained from her face the same way I've seen it drain from patients who have just received terrible news. Helena? Good morning, Vanessa, I said evenly. I'm your attending surgeon. You suffered a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 liver laceration in the accident. Surgery was successful. You're expected to make a full recovery. You're a doctor. I'm the chief of this department. I have been for 2 years. I watched the realization unfold slowly across her face, the same emotional progression my father had gone through, but slower, dulled by morphine. Confusion, disbelief, fear, and finally something I recognized immediately. That familiar flicker in her eyes. Calculation. Even now, lying in a hospital bed with the stitches I placed holding her liver together, Vanessa was already trying to figure out how to twist the story. Helena, listen, she said weakly. I can explain. You don't need to explain anything to me, I replied calmly. I nodded toward the glass door, where 2 figures stood in the hallway, their faces pale and eyes red from lack of sleep. You need to explain it to them. I finished updating her chart, checked the drainage line, and left the room without another word. I didn't stay to hear what happened next, but the entire ICU floor did. Her room wasn't soundproof, and neither was the truth. All right, let me pause for a moment. What do you think Vanessa told my parents when they walked into that ICU room? Option A, she finally told the truth. Option B, she doubled down on the lie. Option C, she played the victim again. What happened next is where everything started collapsing. Later I learned the details from Angela Ramirez, who heard it from the ICU nurse, who heard everything through the glass. If you chose option C, congratulations, you know my sister well. The moment my parents entered the room, Vanessa burst into tears. Loud, shaking sobs that pulled painfully at her surgical stitches and sent the heart monitor climbing. Mom, Dad, you have to believe me, she cried. I never wanted it to go this far. I was just worried about her. My father stood stiffly at the end of the bed. His voice was tight with restraint. Vanessa, Helena is a surgeon. She's the chief of trauma surgery at this hospital. I didn't know that, she said quickly. She told us she sent letters, emails. She called 14 times. She asked Evelyn to talk to us. My mother's voice sounded hollow. Is that true? Vanessa shook her head weakly. She's exaggerating. You know how she— Evelyn tried to tell us, my father interrupted, and this time his voice cracked, not with sadness, but with the collapse of something he had believed for 5 years. 2 years ago, she told us Helena was in residency, that she was a surgeon. You said Evelyn was lying. You said she was trying to stir up trouble. Evelyn doesn't know the whole story. What is the whole story, Vanessa? My mother was shouting now, in the middle of an ICU. The nurse at the station outside flinched. Down the hallway, someone visiting another patient looked up from their phone. And Vanessa, cornered in a hospital bed with IV lines in both arms and my sutures across her abdomen, did what she always did. She shifted from defense to attack. Fine, she snapped. She's a doctor, good for her. But she abandoned this family. She never called because we blocked her number, Vanessa, my father said, gripping the bed rail so tightly his knuckles turned white. Because you told us to. The heart monitor kept beeping. The IV pump clicked quietly. And for perhaps the first time in her adult life, Vanessa Reed had no script left. Evelyn Parker walked into the ICU at 9:45 that morning. I had called her after the surgery, not as a weapon, but because Vanessa was her niece too, and she deserved to know. But Evelyn arrived prepared. 5 years of silence will do that to a person with a strong memory and a well-organized filing system. She didn't sit. She didn't hug anyone. She stood in the middle of the room and said, I've waited 5 years to have this conversation. I'm not waiting one more minute. She pulled out her phone and opened a folder she had labeled, something I would later learn, Helena Evidence. Inside were screenshots of every email I had sent my parents during those desperate first days. The official PDF approving my leave of absence from UCSF School of Medicine, signed by the dean and stamped by the registrar. My re-enrollment confirmation. A photo from my residency graduation, me in a cap and gown holding my diploma. Evelyn stood next to me in that photo, the only family member there. She handed the phone to my mother. And here, Evelyn said, scrolling to another message thread, this is a text Vanessa sent me 4 years ago. She read it out loud. Don't tell Mom and Dad about Helena's residency. It will only confuse them. They're finally at peace. The room went completely silent. Vanessa stared up at the ceiling. The calculating expression I had known my entire life was gone. In its place was something new. The look of someone who had finally run out of places to hide. You told me to stay quiet for the sake of the family, Evelyn said, looking straight at her. But this family hasn't had peace. It's had a 5-year blackout. Then she turned toward my parents. And the two of you allowed this to happen, not because you didn't love Helena, but because believing Vanessa was easier. No one argued. There was nothing left to argue. My mother slowly sank into the chair beside Vanessa's bed, but she wasn't looking at Vanessa anymore. She was scrolling through Evelyn's phone, reading every email I had sent. Her lips moved silently as she read. She stopped at the last one, the email I had written the night before my residency graduation. I know exactly what it says. I've reread it countless times in my sent folder. Mom, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I graduated from residency today. I wish you were here. I'm still your daughter. I never stopped being your daughter. My mother doubled forward in the chair, not crying. It was something deeper than that. It was the sound of someone finally feeling the full weight of a mistake that can never truly be undone. My father stood by the window with his back to the room. His shoulders were shaking. Later, Evelyn told me it was the first time in 62 years she had ever seen her older brother cry. Not at their mother's funeral, not when his company nearly collapsed, not once, but he cried that morning. Quietly, facing the parking lot while the ICU monitor beeped steadily behind him. Vanessa lay motionless in the hospital bed. She had stopped talking entirely. The IV pump clicked steadily beside her. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling, unmoving. There was no performance left to give, no audience that would still believe her. The persona she had carried for 35 years had collapsed onto the linoleum floor, and no amount of charm, tears, or clever reframing was going to rebuild it. You missed her wedding, Andrew, Evelyn Parker said quietly, her voice drained from the long mourning. Daniel's father walked Helena down the aisle. Do you understand what that means? My father didn't turn away from the window, but he spoke. 4 words, low and cracked down the middle. What have we done? It wasn't really a question. It sounded more like a verdict. But understanding the truth and knowing what to do with it are 2 very different things. I returned that afternoon at the end of my shift, 22 hours after the pager had pulled me out of bed. Not that I was counting. My parents were still there. Of course they were. Where else would they go? Back to the house where they had spent 5 years pretending they only had 1 daughter? My mother stood the moment I walked in. Her face was swollen, her eyes nearly closed from crying. Helena, baby, I'm so sorry. I raised my hand gently, stopping her. I hear that you're sorry, I said calmly. And I believe you are, but sorry is just a word. It's the beginning of something, not the end. What I need right now is time. My father turned from the window. He looked like he had aged years since that morning. We want to fix this. Then you need to understand something, I said evenly. There was no anger in my voice anymore, just clarity, the kind that only appears after every other emotion burns away. I'm not the girl you sent away 5 years ago. I'm not the girl who called you 14 times begging you to listen from 3,000 miles away. I'm someone who built an entire life without you. If you want to be part of that life now, it will be on my terms, not Vanessa's, not yours, mine. My father opened his mouth, an old reflex returning. Then he stopped. Slowly he nodded. A small, devastated nod. I looked over at Vanessa in the bed. Her eyes were open now, watching me carefully. When you recover, I said, we're going to have a real conversation, but not today. Today you're my patient and I don't mix the two. Then I left, back straight, steps steady. I didn't look back. I wasn't closing the door. But I was the one who would decide when it opened again, how wide it opened, and who would be allowed through. 2 weeks later, Vanessa was discharged from the hospital. Her surgical incision was healing well. The rest of her, not so much. I chose the meeting place, a coffee shop in Middletown, halfway between her apartment and my house, neutral ground. Daniel came with me but sat at another table near the window pretending to read legal briefs. He wasn't pretending. Vanessa walked in looking hollowed out. She had lost weight. Surgery and stress will do that. And the confidence she usually wore like perfume was completely gone. For the first time I could remember, my older sister looked exactly her age. She sat down across from me, wrapped her hands around a cup she never actually drank from, and stared down at the table. I skipped the small talk. I'm not here to yell, I said. And I'm not going to list every lie you told. You already know what you did. What I want to know is why. The silence stretched long enough that a barista called someone's name across the room, and the sound echoed against the walls. Finally she spoke, quietly. Because you were becoming everything I wasn't. And I couldn't handle it. I let the words sit in the air. That's honest, I said. The first honest thing you've said to me in 10 years. I'm sorry, Helena. I know you are. But sorry doesn't give me those years back. Sorry doesn't put Dad at my wedding. Sorry doesn't undo the package Mom sent back to me, the box with my high school things in it, returned like I was dead to her. She looked away, her eyes filled with tears, real tears. I've learned how to tell the difference. Then she said something I hadn't expected. I also contacted your medical school twice, she admitted quietly. I tried to convince them to revoke your leave of absence. I told them you had faked the caregiver paperwork. The cafe buzzed softly around us. I just stared at her. Your dean didn't listen, she continued. He protected you. He didn't protect me, I said calmly. He believed the truth. That's not the same thing. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow breath. This was the part I had prepared for the night before. Sitting on the kitchen floor with Watson's head resting on my lap, while Daniel helped me think it through like a closing argument. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I said finally. But there are conditions. Vanessa nodded immediately. Small, defeated. You will tell the truth to every family member you lied to. Every aunt, every uncle, every cousin who spent 5 years believing I was in rehab or living on the street. Every story gets corrected. I will. And you'll do it in writing. One email to the entire family group. Every single person. Evelyn will confirm everyone receives it. She nodded again. The following week, I met with my parents separately. Daniel drove me. We sat at their kitchen table, the same table where my father had once read my medical school acceptance letter, the same table where Vanessa had smiled with only her mouth. I'm open to rebuilding a relationship, I told them. But there are conditions. The first is family counseling, both of you. My father's jaw tightened. We don't do that in this family. That's exactly why we're here, Dad. My mother rested a gentle hand on his arm. Andrew, please. He looked at her, then at me. Something behind his eyes shifted. It didn't break open completely, not yet, but it cracked. Fine, he said at last. I stood to leave, then paused at the door and turned back. One more thing. Daniel's father walked me down the aisle. That happened. We can't undo it. But if you want to know your future grandchildren someday, you start now. Not with grand gestures, with consistency. Apologies fade with time. Boundaries don't. That's the difference between emotion and structure. 1 month later, the Physician Excellence Award Gala was held in the ballroom of the Hartford Marquise Hotel. 200 people filled the room. Surgeons, department chairs, hospital administrators, donors, board members. Crystal glasses clinked softly. Name badges hung from lanyards. A string quartet played classical music that no one was really listening to. I wore a simple black dress. Daniel sat at the front table looking perfectly at home in a suit. Dr. Margaret Collins sat beside him, arms folded, wearing the faint smile she reserves for moments she has quietly been orchestrating for years. The Master of Ceremonies stepped to the podium. This year's Physician Excellence Award goes to a surgeon whose clinical skill, composure under pressure, and unwavering commitment to patients have set a new standard for this hospital. Dr. Helena Reed, Chief of Trauma Surgery. The applause was immediate. The surgical staff stood first. They had seen the work. I walked to the stage, the spotlight warm on my shoulders, the podium solid beneath my hands. My speech was short. 5 years ago, I nearly walked away from medicine. Not because I couldn't do the work, but because I lost the people I believed I needed in order to keep going. What I eventually learned is that the people you need aren't always the ones you're born to. Sometimes they're the ones who choose you. I looked toward Maggie, toward Daniel, toward my trauma team sitting together in the third row. Then my eyes moved to the back of the ballroom. 2 seats in the last row. Seats Evelyn Parker had quietly arranged. My parents sat there. My mother wore a navy dress she had probably bought that week. My father looked deeply uncomfortable in a tie he clearly hated. They both stared toward the stage with expressions I can only describe as pride and grief fighting for control of the same face. And sometimes, I continued, the people you're born to find their way back, a little late. But they still find their way. My mother covered her mouth. My father slowly stood. The applause grew louder. After the gala, my father found Daniel near the coat check. He stood in front of him for a long moment before speaking. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I should have been the one walking her down the aisle. Daniel, gracious as always, extended his hand. With all due respect, sir, he said gently, you should have been a lot of things, but we're here now. They shook hands. My father's eyes were red. He held Daniel's hand a little longer than usual before letting go. Vanessa sent the email on a Wednesday night. Evelyn confirmed it had gone out to all 47 relatives on the family mailing list. I didn't read it until the next morning. Daniel brought me coffee, set my laptop on the kitchen table, and walked away without saying anything. He knows when silence is the best kind of support. The email was only 3 paragraphs long. No excuses, no emotional language, just facts. She admitted that she had lied about my leaving medical school, that she had fabricated evidence, that she had kept the fabricated evidence, that she had kept the deception alive for 5 years, that she had deliberately prevented our parents from learning the truth. The final sentence read, "Helena never abandoned this family. I made sure they believed she did. That responsibility belongs entirely to me." The responses arrived slowly. My uncle's wife called Evelyn in tears. She confessed that she had repeated Vanessa's story about me being in rehab at a book club 2 years earlier. My cousin David in Vermont replied to Vanessa with a single sentence, "I don't know who you are anymore." And then there was my grandmother, Nana June, 89 years old, the matriarch who had stopped asking about me at Thanksgiving because Vanessa said it was too painful. She called me herself. "I am 89 years old," she said in a voice that was thin but furious. "And I have never been lied to so thoroughly by my own blood. Helena, forgive an old woman for not seeing the truth." "There's nothing to forgive, Nana," I told her. "You were lied to. All of us were." No one publicly disowned Vanessa. No dramatic declarations were made. No family group chat erupted with threats. Something quieter happened instead. The trust she had built for 35 years simply disappeared. You could feel it in the silence after her email, in the replies that never came, in invitations that slowly stopped arriving. No one punished her. They just stopped believing her. And for someone who had built her entire identity on being believed, that was punishment enough. My parents began counseling in February with a therapist in West Hartford named Dr. Reina Alvarez. Calm, direct, and impossible to dodge. My mother took to it immediately. She had been carrying the weight of her silence for years, and the first time Dr. Alvarez named it, enabling through passivity, my mother broke down and cried for 40 minutes. That's what Evelyn told me. I wasn't there. It wasn't my session to witness. My father struggled more. He showed up. He sat in the chair. He answered questions with as few words as possible. Dr. Alvarez eventually told him something Evelyn later repeated to me: his need to always be right, his refusal to revisit a decision once he had made it, had become the load-bearing wall of the entire disaster. Vanessa created the lie. But my father's pride cemented it into place. He didn't argue with the therapist. That alone was a sign of change. 3 weeks after they began counseling, my mother mailed me a letter, handwritten. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "I failed you," she wrote. "Not only when I believed Vanessa, but every time I chose peace over fairness. Every time I let your father's temper decide what was true. Every time I saw you standing quietly in the doorway, waiting to be heard, and convinced myself you were fine because it was easier than admitting I wasn't brave enough to defend you." I read the letter at my kitchen table. Watson was asleep on my feet. Daniel was in the next room pretending not to listen. I didn't cry, but I held that letter for a long time. Then I opened the drawer where I keep the things that matter. Claire Dawson's note, the letters my parents returned unopened years ago, the wedding invitation that came back in the mail. And I placed my mother's letter inside. Same drawer, different side. Progress isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it simply means learning how to rearrange what you carry. Vanessa started therapy too. Her own sessions, separate from the family counseling. I know because Evelyn mentioned it to me and because Vanessa brought it up briefly, awkwardly, during the second time we met for coffee. We've had 3 of those meetings so far. Each one short, each one uncomfortable, each one a little more honest than the last. The first time she mostly stared down at her hands and said nothing useful. The second time she mentioned the therapy. The third time she finally said something that mattered. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said quietly. "I'm not even sure I deserve that. But I want you to know I'm trying not to be that person anymore." I took a sip of my coffee and set the cup down. "Then show me," I said. "Words are cheap in this family. They always have been. Show me over time." She nodded. No pushing, no performance. That alone was new. Do I believe her? Honestly, I don't know. I've spent my entire life learning how to read Vanessa's performances, and even now I'm not always sure where the acting stops and the real person begins. Maybe she doesn't know either. Maybe that's what therapy is meant to uncover. But I do believe in the possibility of change. Right now, that's all I can offer. She carries my surgical scar on her body, 7 inches across the left side of her abdomen. Over the next year, it will slowly fade from red to pale white. Every morning when she gets dressed, every time she catches her reflection in a mirror, she'll see the mark left by the sister she tried to erase. The sister who, when it mattered most, held a scalpel with steady hands and chose the oath over the anger. And I carry something too. 5 years of silence lodged somewhere beneath my ribs. In the strangest and most painful way two sisters can be, we're even now. Maybe someday, with enough time, enough quiet, ordinary, consistent time, we'll become something other than even. Something better, something new. Tonight I'm sitting in my office at St. Matthew Medical Center. It's late. The hallway outside is quiet in that particular way hospitals become after the last visitors leave and before the night shift fully takes over. My nameplate is on the door. My diplomas hang on the wall, not because I need to look at them, but because the residents do. On my desk sits a framed wedding photo. Daniel, Maggie, Evelyn, 30 guests gathered in an October backyard. No parents in the picture. But on the bookshelf beside it there's a new photograph taken 3 weeks ago. My parents standing on my front porch, coats on, looking slightly unsure. My father's hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. My mother mid-smile, trying a little too hard but trying. It's awkward. It's imperfect. It's real. If you're listening to this story and you see yourself somewhere inside it, whether you were the one who was silenced or the one who did the silencing, I want you to remember something. The truth doesn't expire. It doesn't matter whether it takes 5 days or 5 years. The truth has a patient way of arriving exactly when it's needed. You can't rush it, but you also can't outrun it. I didn't get revenge on my sister. I didn't need revenge. I became someone who no longer needed it. And that turned out to be the most powerful response of all. No schemes, no grand plans. Just a life built fully on my own terms. So if you're waiting for your family to finally see you, really see you, stop waiting. See yourself first. Build the life you deserve with the people who show up for you. And if the others eventually turn around and try to come back, let them find a door that belongs to you. You decide when it opens. You decide how wide it opens. And you decide who walks through. That isn't revenge. That's architecture. Sunday morning, the first week of February. Light snow drifts past the kitchen window, the kind that doesn't stick, just softens everything, like the world is being quietly forgiven. I'm making French toast. Daniel is grinding coffee beans, humming badly along with a song on the radio. Watson is stationed under the table, full of hope that crumbs will appear. The doorbell rings. I wipe my hands on a dish towel and open the front door. My parents are standing on the porch in their winter coats. My father is holding a bottle of orange juice, as if he isn't quite sure what to do with his hands. My mother carries a tin of homemade cookies, shortbread, the kind she used to bake for every one of Vanessa's school events, and never for mine. "Hi," my mom says. Her voice sounds nervous, careful, hopeful. "Come in," I tell them. "Coffee's almost ready." My father steps inside and slowly looks around the kitchen, like he's taking inventory. The house he's never seen before, the life he almost never knew existed. After a moment, he clears his throat. "Can I help with anything?" I look at him. My father, 62 years old, standing in my kitchen for the first time, asking permission to be useful. "You can set the table, Dad." He nods immediately. I point toward the cabinet. He opens it, pulls out plates, counts them, then glances back at me. "4? 4. He places them down one by one, carefully, as if they might break if he isn't gentle. Daniel hands him a mug of coffee. Behind me, my mother steps up to the stove and wraps her arms around me. Not a dramatic hug like in movies, just quiet, her forehead resting against my shoulder. No words, just holding on. Watson's tail thumps happily against the floor. Snow continues to fall outside. The French toast sizzles on the pan. It isn't perfect. It isn't the childhood I should have had, and it isn't the kind of reconciliation you see in films. but it's real. And for a long time, real was something I didn't have. My name is Dr. Helena Reed. I'm 36 years old, and I'm finally, slowly, carefully, allowing myself to be someone's daughter again. 4 plates. It's a start. For a long time, I believed that family was something you either had or you didn't. I thought love from the people who raised you was supposed to be automatic, unbreakable. When I lost mine, it felt like the ground beneath my life had disappeared. But the truth I learned over the past 5 years is different. Family isn't defined only by blood or by the house you grew up in. It's defined by who shows up when the truth becomes uncomfortable, when forgiveness is hard, and when rebuilding requires patience instead of pride. What I learned is that boundaries are not walls meant to punish people. They are structures that protect the life you fought to build. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, doesn't erase the past. It simply creates space for something healthier to grow in the future. You don't need revenge to move forward. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal is building a life so full, so steady, that the people who once doubted you have to stand back and see who you truly became. If this story spoke to you in any way, I'd love to hear from you. Every family carries its own quiet battles, and sometimes the hardest ones are the ones no one else can see. So would you have walked away for good? Your stories and perspectives mean more than you might think, and I read them all. If you believe more people need to hear stories like this, stories about truth, boundaries, and finding your own strength, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need it today. And where we listen, reflect, and support each other through real experiences like these. Thank you for spending your time here with me. Wherever you are in the world today, I hope you remember one thing: your life, your healing, and your boundaries matter.